I came home to find my privacy hedges hacked down and a $750 fine taped to my door. But the Maplewood Estates HOA had no idea they had just messed with their new financial auditor. How would they react when they discovered I had access to 5 years of their questionable financial records? Blood rushed to my face as I stared at the stumps that used to be my beautiful privacy hedges. 6 years of careful growing and weekly trimming destroyed in a matter of hours while I was at work. My hands shook as I peeled the yellow notice from my front door. Vegetation violation corrected. $750 landscaping fee applied to your account. Maplewood Estates HOA. I grabbed my measuring tape from the garage and checked the height of the ruined remains. Exactly 3 feet tall. The HOA rules clearly allowed hedges up to 7 feet. Mine had been 6.5. I measured them every Saturday morning during my trimming routine. Someone had trespassed onto my property and destroyed my hedge barrier for no reason. Through the new gaps, I spotted Linda Cooper from across the street, smirking while pretending to water her tulips. She had complained at multiple neighborhood meetings about my hedges blocking her view. I stormed inside and called the HOA office, my heart pounding. Maplewood Estates HOA, this is Sharon speaking. Sharon, this is Michael Grant from 812 Oakwood Drive. I just came home to find my hedges butchered and a $750 fine stuck to my door. Who authorized this and why? One moment, Mr. Grant. I heard typing on a keyboard. Yes, we received several complaints about visibility issues with your hedges. The board voted last Thursday. Didn't you see the community email? What email? I never received any notice. And my hedges were within the regulation height. I measure them weekly. Sharon's tone hardened. The board determined they exceeded height restrictions and blocked sight lines at the corner. The decision was unanimous. That's impossible. I want to speak to Richard Coleman right now. The board president is unavailable. You may file a formal appeal, but the landscaping fee stands. The work has already been done. I hung up, pacing my living room. This wasn't just unfair, it was illegal. They had no right to enter my property without proper notice. I grabbed my camera and went outside to document the damage. As I snapped photos, a sleek black SUV slowed in front of my house. Richard Coleman, the HOA president, rolled down his window. His sharp gray suit looked untouched by the summer heat. Landscaping looks much better now, Michael. The whole neighborhood thanks you for finally complying with regulations. I was already in compliance, Richard. This was trespassing and destruction of property. His smile didn't reach his eyes. The board has the authority to remedy violations after proper notification. Check your email next time. He started rolling his window up. You targeted me, just like you did to the Harris family last month with their fence, I shot back. The window stopped halfway. Be careful with accusations, Michael. This community runs on rules and respect. Some people struggle with both. The SUV pulled away, leaving me fuming on my lawn. My phone buzzed with an email notification. I opened it and smiled. My job confirmation for next Monday. My new role as financial auditor for Maplewood Estates had just been approved. Richard wouldn't see the paperwork until tomorrow. They had no clue I'd been given full access to their accounts, spending records, and decision logs from the past 5 years. For the first time since coming home, I grinned. Richard Coleman thought he held all the power, but he had just handed me the king's kingdom. That night, I created a fresh folder on my laptop, HOA Audit Priority. Through my bedroom window, left exposed by the missing hedges, I noticed unusual activity at Richard's house. Board members were gathering for an unscheduled meeting. David Morales, the only board member who ever voted against Richard, parked across the street. He looked uneasy as he checked his watch and hurried inside. I set a reminder to speak with David tomorrow. If Richard was calling emergency meetings, something bigger than my hedges was happening in Maplewood Estates. At dawn, I was woken by the roar of Linda's lawnmower. 6 a.m. again, in violation of the community noise ordinance Richard never enforced for his friends. I made coffee and reviewed the HOA bylaws, highlighting every rule about property access, notification requirements, and voting procedures. By the time I finished, one thing was crystal clear. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new era in Maplewood Estates. The HOA had messed with the wrong homeowner. And what they didn't know was that I had 3 secret weapons: patience, attention to detail, and the accounting skills to trace every penny of their precious HOA funds. Would they realize too late?
Their mistake? Before I uncovered what they were really hiding behind those emergency meetings, I arrived at the county records office the moment they opened at 8 a.m. The clerk raised an eyebrow when I requested all property boundary maps and easement records for Maplewood Estates. "Doing some home improvements?" she asked, sliding a heavy binder across the counter. "More like solving a mystery," I replied, flipping to my street section. "Someone cut down my hedges yesterday without permission. I need to know if they had any legal right to be on my land." The maps confirmed exactly what I suspected. The HOA had 0 easement rights on my property beyond the standard utility access points, which were nowhere near my hedges. What they did was straight-up trespassing. While at the records office, something else caught my eye. The landscaping company listed on my violation notice, Elite Green Solutions, had filed its business registration paperwork only 3 months ago. The owner's name jumped out at me: Michael Coleman, Richard's brother-in-law. I photographed everything with my phone and headed to my next stop, Linda Cooper's house. Her car was in the driveway, and I knew she'd be home watching her morning shows. I knocked firmly. When Linda opened the door, her smile faded. "Michael, what a surprise." "Good morning, Linda. Those sprinklers are looking mighty active for a drought restriction day." She glanced nervously at her yard, where sprinklers were indeed running despite the county's odd-even water limits. "Just a quick sprinkle for the new flowers." "Funny how some violations get overlooked while others get immediate action," I said, "like my hedges that were cut yesterday. I wonder if you know anything about the complaints the HOA mentioned." Linda's face flushed. "Well, those hedges were blocking the view of the intersection, safety hazard." "That's interesting, since my property isn't on an intersection, it's mid-block. And the sightline maps I just checked at the county office show no visibility issues. She shifted uncomfortably. Richard said, what? I pressed. She bit her lip. Look, I mentioned at the garden club that your hedges made it hard for me to see if suspicious people were hanging around. Richard said he'd take care of it. Without any formal complaint process or notification to me? That's against HOA bylaws. You should talk to Richard about that, she muttered, starting to close her door. Oh, I will. By the way, when did they start waiving water restriction violations for garden club members? Her door shut without another word. I spent the next 3 hours walking the neighborhood with my phone camera, documenting every single rule violation I could find. Richard's oversized gazebo that exceeded structure height limits, Rob Johnson's unpermitted fence staining, the Bradfords' commercial vehicles parked overnight in their driveway. All violations that belong to board members or their friends, all mysteriously overlooked. As I photographed Richard's non-regulation mailbox, a familiar black SUV pulled up beside me. "Taking up a new hobby, Michael?" Richard's voice was honey-sweet, but his eyes were cold as ice. "Just admiring the neighborhood," I replied calmly. "Lots of interesting exceptions to the rules around here." "Neighbors who work together tend to find reasonable compromises," he said. "Those who cause trouble tend to face more scrutiny." "Is that a threat, Richard?" "Just an observation from 15 years of running this community. The board meeting is tonight. Feel free to file your complaint. We have a special form for chronic complainers." As he drove away, my phone buzzed with an email from the HOA management company. It confirmed my start date for Monday and included preliminary account access credentials requested by David Morales. David was the only board member who consistently challenged Richard's decisions. I logged in immediately from my phone, curiosity burning. The system gave limited weekend access, but enough to see one crucial detail. Payments to landscaping vendors had tripled in the past year, with Elite Green Solutions receiving over $200,000 for emergency vegetation management. My hedge removal alone was billed at $1,500, half charged to me, half paid directly from HOA funds. The sound of a car door closing made me look up. David Morales was walking toward me, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Michael, we need to talk," he said quietly, "but not here. Meet me at Riverside Park in 20 minutes." At the park, seated at a table near the duck pond, David handed me a coffee and got straight to the point. "Richard is planning something big. Yesterday's emergency meeting wasn't on the books. No minutes, no records." "About my hedges?" I asked. "Your hedges were just the beginning. They're using beautification and safety to justify a massive neighborhood renovation project. Elite Green Solutions would get the entire contract, $1.2 million. I nearly choked on my coffee. That's almost all our reserve funds. David nodded grimly. The vote is happening at next week's meeting. They need to move fast because the last quarterly financial review raised questions about spending patterns. "Let me guess," I said. "The review where they hired a new auditor?" "Exactly. They don't know it's you yet. Richard just knows they needed someone with credentials to satisfy the bank's requirements for their loan application."
My mind raced. So they're going to drain all our reserves, then take out a loan funneled through Richard's brother-in-law's company. "That's my guess," David said, "but I can't prove it, and I'm just one vote against 6. I showed him the photos I'd taken at the county office. You might not be able to prove it, but starting Monday, I can access everything. David's eyes widened. Be careful, Michael. The last person who challenged Richard's authority found their job mysteriously at risk after he called their employer with community concerns. I'm not afraid of Richard, I said. You should be, David replied, glancing over my shoulder. He's watching us right now. I turned to see Richard's black SUV parked across the pond, his silhouette visible through the windshield. What would he do when he discovered who the new HOA auditor really was? Monday morning arrived with a knot in my stomach. I straightened my tie, grabbed my briefcase, stuffed with evidence about my hedges, and drove to the HOA office. The glass door slid open as I stepped into the air-conditioned building for the first time, not as a frustrated resident, but as an employee. Sharon looked up from her computer, her usual stern expression melting into shock when I flashed my new security badge. Mr. Grant, what are you doing here? Her fingers froze above her keyboard. Starting my new job, Sharon. I'm the financial auditor Maplewood Estates hired last month. Her mouth dropped open. But your complaint about the hedges, I didn't realize. She fumbled with the papers on her desk. Funny how things work out, isn't it? Now, I'll need complete access to all financial records from the past 5 years. Let's start with landscaping expenditures. My voice stayed steady, though my heart pounded. Sharon's hands trembled as she logged me into the system. Richard usually handles those files personally. Well, today I'll be handling them. That's what I was hired to do. For the next 4 hours, I dug through spreadsheets, invoices, and bank statements. What I found made my blood boil. Elite Green Solutions, the company that destroyed my hedges, appeared in payment records going back 3 years. Their rates were outrageous, $1,200 per hedge when other companies charged $50. I dug deeper. Who owned Elite Green Solutions? A quick registry search revealed Matthew Coleman as the owner. Coleman? Richard's last name? Could it be? I called a friend at the county clerk's office. Hey, Sammy, need a quick favor. Can you tell me if Matthew Coleman is related to Richard Coleman from Maplewood Estates? 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text. Matthew is married to Richard's sister. They share a vacation home in Palm Springs. My hands shook as I printed key documents. Richard had been funneling HOA money to his brother-in-law's company for years. Last year alone, they received $216,700 for emergency vegetation management. But it got worse. I noticed a pattern in violation notices. Homes belonging to board members and their friends never received fines, while others were hit with penalties for the smallest issues. My $750 fine wasn't unusual. Dozens of residents had faced similar charges, often for violations that didn't even exist according to HOA rules. I created a map of the neighborhood, marking properties with violations and their connections to board members. The pattern was undeniable. Selective enforcement designed to protect insiders and punish everyone else. At 4:30 p.m., I heard Richard's voice in the hallway. Quickly, I gathered my papers and slipped out the back door. I needed time to organize my findings before confronting him. Driving home, adrenaline pumping, I spotted David Morales walking his dog. I pulled over. "David, got a minute?" He approached cautiously. "Michael, heard you got slammed with a hedge violation. Tough break." "Did you know the HOA is paying triple the normal rate to Richard's brother-in-law's landscaping company?" His eyes widened. What? How do you know that? I'm the new financial auditor, started today. He let out a low whistle. Richard never mentioned hiring you. That explains why he's been so nervous lately. Nervous how? I asked. David lowered his voice. He called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow night. The agenda just says personnel restructuring, but he told me privately it was about protecting the HOA's financial integrity from internal threats. My heart sank. He's trying to fire me before I can report what I found. Probably. He's done it before. Anyone who asks too many questions. David shifted uneasily. Look, I joined the board to make positive changes, but Richard runs it like his personal kingdom. Nothing happens without his approval. I handed him copies of the documents I'd printed. Take these home, look them over. If anything happens to me or my job, these need to reach every homeowner in Maplewood Estates. That evening, I organized my findings into a clear presentation. Just as I finished, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw David looking pale. "Richard just sent a group text to the board," he said when I opened the door.
She claims you're abusing your position to pursue a personal vendetta over your hedges. She's gathering votes to terminate your contract tomorrow. I invited David inside and showed him my completed presentation. Let her try. I've documented everything. The nepotism, the inflated contracts, the selective enforcement. I even found evidence that she personally flagged my property for immediate action the day after I questioned her about rising HOA fees at last month's meeting. David studied my dining room wall, now covered with charts, emails, and photos. This is bigger than I thought. What's your plan? I'm going to that board meeting tomorrow night, I said, and I'm bringing everything I found. Richard thinks he's protecting himself, but he's actually given me the perfect audience. He'll never let you speak. He controls the agenda with an iron fist. I pulled out the HOA bylaws and pointed to a highlighted section. Article 7, Section 3. It allows any resident to present relevant financial information at public meetings. He can't stop me without breaking his own rules. David smiled for the first time that evening. You really did your homework. When someone cuts down your hedges, you learn to dig up their roots. I handed him a flash drive. Backup copy, just in case. As David left, he turned at the door. "Be careful, Michael. Richard won't go down without a fight." I nodded. Good, because neither will I. Rain poured down as I pulled into the packed community center parking lot. Every spot was taken, unusual for a Tuesday night HOA meeting that normally drew only a handful of residents. Word had clearly spread about tonight's emergency session. I grabbed my laptop bag and ran through the downpour, nearly colliding with Linda at the entrance. Her usual smug smile disappeared when she saw me. "You're not welcome here," she hissed, blocking the doorway. "This meeting is for discussing board matters." I held up the meeting notice. It says all homeowners are invited to attend. Last I checked, I still own my home, even with shorter hedges. Inside, the room hummed with whispered conversations that went silent the moment I walked in. Every folding chair was filled, with more residents standing along the walls. Many nodded or gave me small waves. At the board table, David sat stiffly beside Richard, who arranged papers with sharp, angry movements. I took the last empty seat in the front row and connected my laptop to the projector cable. Richard's narrowed eyes followed my every move. At exactly 7 o'clock, he tapped the microphone, his diamond rings catching the fluorescent light. His smile looked painted on, not reaching his eyes.
Welcome, everyone. Before we begin official business, I'd like to address a serious situation regarding our new financial auditor, Michael Grant. He pointed at me without turning his head. Mr. Grant has been making unfounded accusations and misusing his position to pursue a personal grudge after receiving a standard violation notice. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Richard continued, his voice sharpening. The board will be voting tonight to terminate his contract immediately to protect our community's financial security. I stood up, projector remote in hand. Actually, Richard, I'd like to present my preliminary audit findings directly to the community. His smile vanished. This isn't on the agenda, Mr. Grant. Sit down or I'll have you removed. I held up the HOA bylaws booklet. Article 7, Section 3 states any resident may present relevant financial information at public meetings. And trust me, what I found is very relevant to everyone here. David? Richard snapped. David cleared his throat. He's right, the bylaws allow it. Fine. 5 minutes, Mr. Grant. Thank you. I pressed the remote. The first slide appeared. A photo of my butchered hedges. Many of you know what happened to my property last week. What you don't know is why. Click. Next slide. A screenshot of emails between Richard and Sharon. This email shows Richard personally ordering action against my property, despite compliance reports confirming my hedges were within the 6.5-foot regulation. Richard lunged for the projector cord. These are private communications. You have no right. As HOA auditor, I have every right to review enforcement-related communications, and homeowners have every right to know when rules are being applied unfairly. I moved to block him from yanking the cord. Click. Next slide. A breakdown of landscaping expenses over 3 years. Elite Green Solutions has received over $500,000 of our HOA fees since 2021. Their rates are triple the market average. Can anyone guess who owns Elite Green Solutions? This is slander, Richard shouted. It's public record, I replied calmly, holding up business registration documents. Elite Green Solutions is owned by Matthew Coleman, Richard's brother-in-law. Every time they cut shrubs or remove a tree, your HOA fees fund Richard's family. Gasps echoed through the room. An elderly man stood up. They charged me $900 to trim one oak tree last spring, said it was an emergency hazard removal. I nodded. The HOA paid $1,200 for that same job. The going rate from other companies, about $350. More residents began speaking up, sharing similar stories. I let them talk, then clicked again. But it gets worse.
I clicked to a neighborhood map with red and green dots marking houses. Green dots show properties belonging to board members and their friends. Red dots show everyone else. Notice anything about violation enforcement patterns? The contrast was stark. Clusters of green dots had no violations, while red dots were covered with multiple citations. I reviewed 3 years of violation records. If you're friends with board members, your violations magically disappear. If you've ever questioned the board, like I did at last month's meeting about rising fees, you suddenly get hit with multiple violations. Richard's face turned scarlet. These are baseless accusations. The board has always acted in the community's best interest. From the front row, an unexpected ally emerged. Mrs. Carter, who rarely spoke at meetings, stood shakily with her cane. Then explain why you fined me for my rose bushes being too tall, but Linda's illegal swimming pool addition never received a citation.
Linda gasped. My pool is fully approved. Mrs. Carter held up papers. Not according to the county permit office. I checked. More residents started speaking up. They fined me $500 for parking my work van overnight once. They made me repaint my whole house because the shade of blue was too bright. I got cited for a basketball hoop that's been there for 5 years. I returned to my presentation. The most concerning finding is this. I displayed a graph showing the HOA reserve fund declining sharply. Our community's emergency reserves have shrunk by 40% in 2 years with no major improvements to justify the expense. Richard tried to regain control, grabbing the microphone. This meeting is adjourned. We will address these fabricated concerns at a later date after proper review. David stood up, his quiet voice cutting through the chaos. Point of order. The meeting cannot be adjourned without a vote. He reached for the gavel Richard was clutching. I motioned to continue the meeting and vote for an independent forensic audit of all HOA finances for the past 5 years. Second, called voices from around the room. This is ridiculous, Richard snapped. All in favor? David asked. Hands shot up throughout the room. Nearly every resident voted yes. Motion passed, David declared. The board will arrange for an independent auditor, not Mr. Grant, to avoid any conflict of interest, to conduct a complete forensic audit. Richard flung the gavel onto the table with a crack. You'll regret this, he snarled at me as he gathered his designer briefcase. All of you will regret this. I've given 15 years to this community. No, Richard, I replied quietly, so only he could hear. You've taken from this community for 15 years. There's a difference. As he stormed toward the exit, he jabbed a manicured finger at my chest. You've made a terrible mistake, Michael. This is my neighborhood. I built it, and I can tear you down just as easily as those stupid Hedges. I watched him leave, then turned back to find David organizing residents into action committees. The elderly Mrs. Carter patted my arm. Young man, I've lived here since before the HOA existed. What you did tonight took guts. I smiled. Sometimes you have to stand your ground. Well, you certainly did that. She pointed to Richard's abandoned gavel on the table, and it looks like the balance of power just shifted. Little did I know, Richard wasn't one to surrender power easily. His next move would make cutting my hedges look like a friendly gesture. Loud banging on my front door jolted me awake at 6:15 a.m. I peered through the blinds to see a bulldozer rumbling in front of my house. Richard stood in my yard wearing a bright yellow safety vest, pointing and giving orders to a work crew. I rushed outside, still in pajamas and slippers. Stop right now! What's happening on my property? Richard turned with a fake smile that didn't reach his eyes. Good morning, Michael. We're conducting an emergency pipe inspection. Our sensors detected a major water leak under your front yard that's wasting community resources. That's impossible. I had my plumbing checked last month, I said, stepping between him and the nervous-looking workers. You can't just show up and start digging. Richard pulled a paper from his clipboard. Actually, I can. This emergency work order gives us full access. See these signatures? All perfectly legal. I snatched the paper and examined it. The document looked official, but something felt wrong. You need proper notice for this kind of work. Not for emergencies, Richard said, grabbing the paper back. Now please step aside, or I'll be forced to call the police for interfering with critical infrastructure repair. My neighbor, Mrs. Gonzalez, came out of her house, coffee in hand. Michael, everything okay? Soon other neighbors appeared, curious about the commotion. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling David. Richard smirked. Call whoever you want. This is happening. While my phone rang, I noticed something odd about the work crew. They weren't wearing the usual utility company uniforms, just generic work clothes. And their truck had a magnetic sign that looked freshly applied. David arrived 10 minutes later, still buttoning his shirt.
David was still buttoning his shirt as he studied the work order, while Richard tapped his foot impatiently. "This authorization requires 3 board signatures," David said. "I only see yours and Robert's. Who's the third?" Richard pointed to a scribble at the bottom. "Linda signed as acting secretary." "That's not how it works," David replied. "Linda isn't the secretary, and emergency votes require notifying all board members, including me." More neighbors gathered, whispering among themselves. I raised my voice so everyone could hear. "This is pure revenge for last night's meeting. Richard's trying to tear up my yard before the forensic accountants arrive tomorrow." Phones came out as people started recording. Richard's face reddened. "This is a legitimate emergency. The leak could damage the foundation of nearby homes." I crossed my arms. "Then where's the water company? Where's the leak detection equipment? Where's the official notice to dig?" "I don't need to explain board decisions to you," Richard snapped, losing his cool. "Either move aside or face the consequences." One of the workers approached Richard, looking uncomfortable. "Sir, if this isn't properly authorized, we could lose our licenses." Richard whirled on him. "You're being paid to do a job, not ask questions." I stepped forward. "Actually, I have questions too, like why this crew is from Johnson Brothers Excavation when our HOA contracts exclusively with city utilities for infrastructure, and why does your business license number not match any registered company in this county?" The crew looked at each other nervously. One whispered to the others, and they began packing up their marking flags. "Where do you think you're going?" Richard yelled. "I'm paying you good money." The crew leader shook his head. "Sorry, sir, we didn't sign up for this. You said this was all approved." Just then, 2 news vans turned onto our street, cameras already rolling. David smiled at my surprised look. "I called them last night after the meeting. Thought they might be interested in our HOA drama." Richard's face drained of color as he saw the reporters heading our way. He fumbled for his car keys. "This isn't over, Michael," he hissed. "Nobody challenges me and gets away with it." "You started this war when you cut down my hedges," I replied calmly, "but I'm going to finish it." As Richard sped away in his SUV, a reporter approached with a microphone. "Sir, we received a tip about possible HOA corruption in Maplewood Estates. Can you tell us what's happening here today?" I looked directly into the camera. "I'm about to show you how one man turned our neighborhood into his personal kingdom and how we're taking it back." "Breaking news in the Maplewood Estate scandal," the TV announcer said as I turned up the volume. "Former HOA President Richard Coleman has been arrested today on multiple charges of fraud and financial misconduct following a 6-week investigation." My phone immediately buzzed with texts from neighbors. The news we'd all been waiting for had finally arrived. The day after the bulldozer incident, everything had snowballed faster than I could have imagined.
The local news segment went viral when people saw footage of Richard trying to dig up my yard. Reporters started digging too, not into my lawn, but into the HOA's finances. I opened my front door to find David standing there with a bottle of champagne. Did you see? They finally got him. I invited him in, and we watched as the reporter continued. According to court documents, Coleman and 3 other board members allegedly misappropriated over $400,000 in homeowner fees over a 5-year period through fake invoices, inflated contracts, and hidden kickbacks. The forensic accountants had found far more than I ever suspected. Richard had been running the neighborhood like his personal piggy bank for years. Every speed bump installation, every tree trimming service, every community event had hidden money flowing back to him and his friends. I still can't believe how quickly everything fell apart for him, David said, shaking his head. After the news van showed up at your house that morning, Richard made his biggest mistake. Instead of lying low, he called an emergency board meeting that same afternoon and tried to fire you from your auditor position. But when he arrived, the room was full of angry homeowners and 2 detectives from the county financial crimes unit. Remember how he tried to claim he was the victim? That we were all conspiring against him? David laughed, and then Linda cracked and started crying, admitting everything right there in front of everyone. She was the first to turn on Richard, offering to testify in exchange for leniency. Then Robert from the board did the same. Within days, Richard's carefully built empire had crumbled. My doorbell rang again. This time it was Mrs. Gonzalez with a homemade cake. I saw the news. We're celebrating tonight, yes? Soon, my living room filled with neighbors bringing food and drinks. It had become a tradition over the past weeks, gathering at different houses to share updates as the investigation unfolded.
What did they find at Elite Green Solutions? Asked Mr. Jenkins, a retired postal worker. They were charging us triple for half the work. My brother's a landscaper, and he nearly fell over when I showed him our invoices. The landscaping company owned by Richard's brother-in-law had been the biggest scheme of all. They billed for work never done, used cheap chemicals that damaged plants, and cut corners everywhere while charging premium prices. "Did you hear about Linda's house?" Mrs. Gonzalez whispered. "It's going up for sale next week. She can't afford to stay after paying back what she took." I nodded. I feel bad for her kids, but she made her choices. The temporary board, now led by David, had been working around the clock to rebuild our community's finances and trust. We discovered the reserve fund was nearly empty, barely enough to cover basic maintenance. "Michael, tell everyone your good news," David called out, raising his glass for attention. All eyes turned to me. I hadn't planned to share this yet, but the moment felt right. "I got a call from the county commissioner yesterday," I said. "They're forming a special task force to investigate HOA fraud across the county. They've asked me to join as a citizen advisor to help draft new regulations." The room erupted in cheers and applause. "That's not all," I continued once the noise died down. "Remember those $750 hedge cutting fees Richard charged people over the years? The board voted yesterday to refund every penny, plus interest." More cheers filled the room. Later, as people began heading home, David and I stepped outside.
The street looked different now, more like a real neighborhood than just a collection of houses. People waved to each other and stopped to chat. Kids played in front yards that had once been off limits thanks to Richard's strict rules. "Look," David said, pointing to my front yard. Tiny green shoots were pushing up where my hedges had once stood. "I planted new ones last weekend," I said. "They'll take years to grow back," I said. "But they will grow back," David replied. "And we'll be here to see it," David replied. My phone buzzed with a news alert. I opened it and showed David the screen. The county prosecutor had just announced they were expanding the investigation to 3 other HOAs where Richard had served as a consultant. How many other neighborhoods has he damaged, David wondered. "Too many," I said, "but not anymore." As the sun set over Maplewood Estates, I felt something I hadn't experienced since moving here: pride in my community. We'd faced a bully together and won. We'd rebuilt what was broken. A car slowed as it passed my house. The driver rolled down her window. It was a woman I didn't recognize. "Excuse me," she called out. "I'm looking at a house for sale on Maple Street. Is this a good neighborhood to live in?" David and I exchanged glances and smiled. "It is now. It really is." Who would have thought that my destroyed hedges would lead to saving an entire community?